Hi everyone, this is the last constructivism lecture here. We're going to talk about anarchy is what states make of it, which is the very famous quote, I think, from Alexander Wendt, which you should all know. And again, he's trying to get at the point that anarchy itself, and we talked about this in the last lecture, anarchy itself doesn't cause anything. And in fact, we can have different kinds of anarchy depending on the way we understand anarchy, and we give some examples of that last time. There's going to be a little bit more of that this time, and yeah, I'm just trying to get the slideshow going now. So let's do that. Share screen. All right. Anarchy is what states make of it. This is also it's an article, I believe, as well by Wendt, and it's a famous thing, and it sort of sums up what constructivism means. Is that states have some sort of agency here, right? There's the structure, there's the agency, and there's a relationship between them, right? Does the structure create the agents? Yes. Do the agents create the structure? Yes. But remember that constitutive relationship that we talked about in the very first of the 3 lectures, right? Constitutive relationship. So these are mutually constitutive. They constitute each other. The system, the anarchic system, and the states, the units inside of it. So we've got these different kinds of structures. Of course, the macro structure is the international political system as a whole. It's the prevailing structure across international relations. But then there's also micro structures, right? Micro, so bilateral and small scale multilateral relationships. So we talked about a bunch of those last time. We talked about Canada and the United States. We mentioned Sweden and Norway. We mentioned Britain and the United States as opposed to North Korea and the United States, right? And those are sort of micro structures that exist. And I think for Wendt, basically, you get a bunch of these microstructures and they just create the macro structure, right? So the macro structures are constituted of many of these microstructures. So India, it has a relationship with China. The United States has a relationship with China. Australia has a relationship with China. Germany has a relationship with China. Albania has a relationship with China. And so, you know, those are all sort of micro structures. And then also you've got something like the EU, which is a bunch of relationships between European countries, but also the EU has relationships with others. And so these are all microstructures that all together make one big macro structure, and that's the prevailing structure across international relations. I will see there's different types of structure, different types of anarchies, he calls them, but if you have, you know, if most of the structures are sort of make friendly microstructures, then that's what the whole international system will be. And if most of them enmity, then the international system will be one like what Waltz describes, right, in neorealism. Wendt's argument, anarchic structures do construct their elements. These structures vary on the macro level. So in the same way that I just explained, right, these microstructures sort of building a particular macro structure, these microstructures building a particular macrostructure, that macrostructure then constructs the units inside, which then construct the micro, which then constructs the macro, right? So it's mutually constitutive. And you know, the way that these structures get built, right? What's the structures are made of? Well, they're made of norms. And so how do these norms spread themselves throughout the system? And here's one of the answers, right? So Wendt says, look, there's 3 degrees of acceptance when it comes to norms. We just states are forced to accept a particular norm. Trying to think of an easy example for that one, an obvious example. Either from something that we've, you know, maybe we could talk about the thing that's coming to my mind is the Venezuela thing, right? Where the Venezuela has an argument with the British Empire over a border in North and South America, and the United States steps in and sort of forces Britain to recognize the norm that the United States has primacy in the Western Hemisphere, right? So that might be a situation where one state was forced to accept a particular norm, right? The norm being the sort of Monroe Doctrine, right? So that's that. The next one is self-interest. Right? Sometimes states adopt norms because it's beneficial to them, right? So maybe the sort of international waters thing, right? So if you're the United States and it's beneficial for you to be able to have oil tankers, but also, you know, the oil tankers are really good at Japan and not really good at the United States, but, you know, it's in your benefit to have sort of free, open seas that trade and goods and goods can pass around, and your navy, it's the most powerful navy, right? So you want your ships to be able to go around wherever they need to go around, and so you know, the sort of norm of the open seas is beneficial to the United States, and so they adopt it, right? That's one other way that might make states adopt particular norms. The other one is that they might just say it as legitimate, right? States might just say, well, no, that's legitimate. Think about it, and they want to follow it. Think of human rights type things, right? So you see, you know, are humans, you know, deserving of, you know, protection of their life, their liberty, their property, right? Are they deserving of, you know, and if you say no to that, it makes you, usually everybody else thinks you're quite a bad person, right? And so, so you say yes, and because it seems legitimate, and you want to be following that norm because it's the only legitimate way to be. And if you're in a different way, that could cause trouble, right? But you want to follow it. So whatever these different norms are, and however they spread, either through force or through self-interest or through legitimacy, right? Which all three of them are at work. Then you get different kinds of anarchy, right? Different structures, really, right? The point of calling them anarchies is, again, anarchy is what states make of it, right? And there's an anarchic structure, but what does anarchy mean? And Wendt says it means something different. There's an anarchy, anarchy one, which is characterized by enmity, it's this sort of relationship between self and other, right? So self and other. I don't really like to use those terms all the time. Let's use like me and you. So in enmity, you don't recognize my right to exist, and I don't recognize your right to exist, right? This is enmity, right? So I don't think you have a right to be, and you don't think I have a right to be. And because of that, there's no limits to the use of violence between you and me, right? We're enemies. So if I see you and I shoot you in the street, that's it. I mean, that's very possible and completely acceptable. There's no limits in this type of anarchy. The other thing is we don't have any shared knowledge, right? If we were to fight, you know, it's not really a war, right? Because a war suggests some sort of a shared understanding, right? It's a sort of a war is a kind of social structure, right? We expect certain things to happen, you know, and like Hedley Bull was saying last time, right? There's certain like prisoners of war, you know, you have to treat them in a certain way, and even in the Second World War, that was oftentimes recognized. And so, but if you think of it between perhaps like the thing that the example that probably comes to mind, right, is that perhaps the ways that either the British Empire behaved in Africa, right, towards local populations, the Spanish, right, in South America to the populations that are indeed the British and European settlers probably more generally as well in relation to the Native Americans here, where, you know, it wasn't quite a war, right? It's like these people, at least in the sort of norms, in the terminology of the day, like they're not really full human beings even. They don't even have the full human rights. Like, we weren't talking so much about human rights back in those days, but they don't have the same status. And so when our interactions with them, if they're violent interactions, it's not really a war, right? It's something else. And that might not be quite as true about all of those instances that I said at the beginning, but that's the sort of close approximation. Maybe like Greeks and barbarians, where it's like, well, they're just not subject. Like, we don't have any relationship. We can't have a relationship with them. We don't understand them, and they're different from us. They're not the same sort of race, I suppose, as us. Yeah, in terms of human race, right? There's something a little bit different. And so, you know, maybe the Spartans and the Helots, right? The slaves, like, if we kill them, it's not the same as killing another Spartan, right? It's not the same as going to war with other Greeks. It's, you know, we just, I mean, we're hunting them for sport, I think, every so often, right? So anyway, that's maybe anarchy one, right? Of enmity, but there's no recognition that Helots have the right to live. There's no recognition that they have the right to exist, and so there's no limits to the violence we can use against them. And, you know, when we do use violence, it's not even a war. we're dealing with other beings are enemies. How do you deal with enemies? That's the only sort of, that's the only shared knowledge. So these guys are not beings, they're not our equals, they're not our kind, and they're our enemies. And so however, how do we deal with enemies? That's the way we deal with them, right? So there is a sort of a limited shared knowledge, which is like how to treat enemies badly, right? And slaughter them, perhaps. And there's 4 policy implications. So in a system where we have an enmity, anarchy characterized by enmity, will have these implications. One, we'll try to destroy the enemy. In the worst case, we'll prevent, we'll think in worst case scenarios. Because they don't recognize our right to exist, we expect that they'll try and annihilate us, right? That's the worst case, right? We're all dead, and they've got our stuff, and they're enjoying our stuff after we've died. That's the worst case, right? And so anything that they do, we will interpret in those terms, right? So ask ourselves this question as we go through this, right? What sort of, if we think of the micro relationship between, the microstructure between the United States and Russia right now, are we here? Or are we at the next one? We'll read the next one. Rival is the next one. So enmity, they're our enemy. Worst case scenario, they're trying to annihilate us. And in those situations, relative material capabilities will be seen as crucial. Right? This is neo-realism, probably, right? And there's no limits to violence, which we've already said. There's so few limits that we have to say it twice. And the next one is rival, right? So there's another possibility, and it's in between enmity and friendship, and it's called rival. And it's like, look, I recognize that you have the right to live. Like, I recognize you as sort of an individual separate from me that has the same rights roughly as I do. You have the right to live, and you have the right to have your own property. And I'm going to recognize that, over there, you make your own decisions. Right? You're sovereign, and we have mutual recognition, right? You say, yep, you're a person, you deserve to exist, you have the right to make your own decisions over there in your sphere, and I have the right in my sphere, and that's a recognition. But we do use violence, and we do threaten violence to settle disputes. And so it's a step up from enmity. It's a different kind of anarchy. Right? Is this what we have between between the United States and Russia? Right? What do we have in the macro structure? Is it an anarchy of rivals? Right? And so then the implications might be similar. We'll still care about relative capabilities. I actually don't have any slides for this. I don't know why. I just noticed that today. But we'll still recognize. Let's go back to the last slide, right? So if we did this same slide, which I assume I must have done at one point, but for rivals, right? We'll say we won't try and destroy the enemy. We won't try and wipe them out. We'll have there'll be disagreements. We'll have disagreements. We will have violence, but it will be limited violence, right? Because I recognize your right to exist, I'm not going to kill you. No way. And similarly, because you recognize I have the right to exist, you're not going to kill me. But you might use some violence, and you and me, maybe hopefully we wouldn't, right? But states, right, might use some violence against their rivals, but it'll be a limited amount of violence, and it'll be focused on particular, more limited outcomes. So material capabilities are still important, right? Still important. But maybe we're not focusing on the worst case. Imagine now an Anarchy 3, Anarchy of friendship. The only difference, by the way, is in Anarchy 3 that we recognize each other's right to exist, and we also, the only thing that makes us friends is that we won't use violence against each other. We say, no, we're never going to use violence against each other. We'll have our disagreements, but we'll settle them peacefully. And so hopefully, right, in civilized society, right, that's usually the way that everybody is in terms of individuals, right? We're all in that state of friendship, right? That we sort of rule out violence as an option. And we recognize each other's right to exist, and we're going to try and settle our differences peacefully when we have differences. And in that case, then, if relative material capabilities, right, how big's your army, how big's my army, that becomes less important, right, because we've sort of ruled out violence, right? And so I'll end this there, but you can see there's these 3 anarchies: Anarchy 1, enmity; Anarchy 2, rivalry; and Anarchy 3, friendship. They're different, they have different policy implications. Now what Do we try and wipe out our friends? No. Do we even go to war with our friends? No. And so we don't use violence. Are we thinking worst case? No, we're probably thinking best case. Probably think of this is my friend and he doesn't have any ill will or intention towards me. So maybe if he starts moving his troops to my border, maybe I'm not thinking imminent invasion. Maybe I'm thinking, oh, he's going on exercises. He's training his men. Fair enough. We're friends, right? If the Canadians move troops close to the American border, like Britain, for example, my brother, my half brother, he was in the army, in the British Army, and he got sent to Canada, right? The Canadian government were not worried about that, right? They weren't thinking, oh, these are the British armies coming over to invade us, right? Because they're friends and they, right? They go there regularly to train, and he was training over there, and then he came back. Similarly, he went to Germany, right? And it was expected, right? It's not the worst case scenario that people are thinking. It's the best case scenario. And when thinks that all these anarchies are really possible, and that's it.